You've made a D&D map. It has mountains, it has rivers, it has a kingdom with a name like Forador. And your players looked at it and said, cool, and then completely forgot about it. Because here's the truth. Most fantasy maps are technically fine, but completely forgettable. They're boring, and it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. People have been told to focus on geography, on storytelling, on ease of reading, on ease of making. Maybe you followed tutorials, maybe you laid out tectonic plates, you've added biomes, traced a few coastlines, filled in the mountains and the rivers, but somehow, look, it can still feel empty. And that's what we're going to fix today. We're going to look at why most D&D maps fall flat, how to bring them to life. I'll even show you 2 examples that I've made. One which follows the traditional rules, the ones that you'll see at the start of fantasy books, in the same styles that were very popular in those genres during the 70s and 80s and 90s. We'll deconstruct why they're boring and talk about how you can make them more interesting. So let's talk about why most maps feel dead and how you can make yours a little bit more interesting. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan, and today we're going to be deconstructing how you've made your map boring without intending to, and how you can make it look a little bit better in future by applying a few simple rules. Over the course of the channel, I have made dozens, at this point nearly 100 maps for different videos and different topics and different themes. And I'm going to take that experience and tell you how you can make your maps just feel a little bit better. In order to make sure that you are aware that this is not a skill issue. It's not about drawing, it's not about artistic talent. It is just about how you are applying the information to the page. I'm only going to be using a limited number of tools. I'm going to be using ink alone. I'm not going to be using any watercolors, any paints, any fancy materials, just white paper, black, blue, and red ink, and that is it. So follow along, I'll talk about this topic and we can explore it a little bit further. So let's talk about what we mean when we say a map is boring, because there's really 2 different directions you can go in when you're talking about a boring map. And the first is really kind of simple. It's the storytelling version of boring. The kind of generic map that you look at and you realize you've seen 100 variations of the same thing. It's got, a rolling coastline, a small archipelago off the coast. It's got a kingdom with a city called Silverkeep or Tall Spires or Fairmont. It's got the Valley of the Winds and the Mountains of Mist. It's just doing the same old thing over and over and over again. It shows the geography, but it doesn't really tell us anything new. There's nothing worth exploring there because we've all seen it before. And the second kind of boring is boring to look at. It's aesthetically or functionally boring. It's the one where you've got nice rounded coastlines, you've got long wiggly rivers, you've got mountain peaks that look moderately like mountains and kind of like triangles from a specific angle. It's got little icons, but the icons also don't really go into what's actually there on the map. And more often than not, it has absolutely nothing for dozens, if not hundreds of miles between towns and cities. All that's there is just what's needed to tell a story and nothing more. Now, both of these problems, both of these genres of boring are really easy to fall into for a number of reasons. First of all, it's easy to fall into because of that particular genre of fantasy book that we all read growing up or even now. I'm going back through my collection. And you see that they've done the bare minimum in creating the map. They've given you exactly what you need to know and nothing more. And they've made sure that it's easy to print. And easy to print generally means fairly boring to look at. A map is interesting because it contains details, because it contains stories. And being conducive to printing is not necessarily along the same lines as being interesting to look at, because we don't remember smooth curves and nice type font. We remember stories, and we remember nooks and crannies and details, connections between things, how they move across the land on the page. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create 2 maps. The first of the maps is for a kingdom called Forador, and Forador is pretty interesting, I suppose, from a strictly static viewpoint. It's got several cities, several towns, a lot of rivers, it's got a mountain range, it's by the sea. But on the map, it's it's boring. It's boring in both ways. It's boring in the storytelling way and it's boring in the visual way. The coastlines are curved and boring. The mountains are peaked and boring. The cities have names like Valleyfair and Stoneville and Greywatch, and there are 2 monasteries, but the monasteries' names are descriptive of their location and not descriptive of anything else. It doesn't tell us who lives in this place. It doesn't tell us what its history is, what its story is. It doesn't pull us into mystery and intrigue. It's just telling us where we can encounter the story and nothing else. And on the plus side, it's easy to read and it's fairly easy to do. If you want to make a map like this one took me, I think, about 11 minutes total, start to finish, without a sketch. So it's a style that's applicable, approachable, and generally fairly easy to replicate. If you want to make a map like this yourself, then go ahead, why not? But if you want to make a map that looks interesting, let's take a look at the second example that I've created here and why it's interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a piece of geography that is based on the peninsula of Greece in the Mediterranean for a number of reasons, mainly because I've done several maps of it in the past and it's easy to memorize, but more importantly because it's got very, very interesting geography. It's all mountains and coastlines and islands and rivers, which is fantastic if you want to make a piece of land look interesting. Because the number one thing about making maps interesting is add details. I've said it in many videos before, but if you're creating a fantasy kingdom, then it's important to remember that the people traveling from major city to major city will need somewhere to stop overnight, which means that villages and towns are generally about a day's travel away from each other. If you've got a kingdom in which there's just great swathes of nothingness between these massive cities, then you've got a kingdom that's boring. But if you wanted to apply yourself to world building, add in more villages and towns, create some more details in the kingdom, then not only is that going to be more interesting to look at, it's going to be closer to what reality actually gives us. So not only in the same area do I have many more cities and towns and villages, and I'm able to differentiate between them using different sizes of icons and different thicknesses of pens, but I've also got far more detail in terms of what you can find. You've got different kingdoms and different regions, bays and islands and rivers and mountains, and not all of them are labeled. You don't need to label all of them. All you need to do is imply that they exist. When you're creating a map that looks interesting, one of the easiest ways to give it some more history and give it a voice for its people is to label the landscape. Name the islands, the rivers, the mountain peaks, the bays and inlets, because that's a really easy way of giving history. So here, in the same area on the page, instead of just one kingdom, I have 6. And they're all different. They have different naming traditions. I've taken some from Scotland, I've taken some from Renaissance Italy, I've taken some from ancient Greece, I've taken some from Norse. There's a huge variety here and a change in the way that they form their words, which is interesting to look at and connect them in a way that the reader can understand. Because the second rule is break the symmetry. Make sure that it doesn't just curve around. Curves and jagged edges are both naturally occurring parts of the coastline. You should have both. It can't be all jagged, but it can't be all curved either. Make sure that it's not symmetrical, that it's not just the same pattern over and over and over again. It should be unbalanced, it should be different, it should be interesting, because the eye will naturally follow what lines you create. So if you want to draw the eye, you want to create a straight line, which means that the coastline should not be straight, because you want the eye to follow the line of labels and roads and other trading routes and things like that. You don't want it to follow the curve of the coast and the bays and the rivers. They are naturally very jagged, and they should be jagged on your map. The third rule is a bit more abstract, but it works for both of these kinds of boring, and it's explore some conflict. On the one hand, conflict on the page in terms of the story is interesting. You can create warring empires, battlefields, ruins, and lost artifacts all on the page, and that's interesting for people to explore. If I have a place called Empty Nonaros, then people are going to wonder why it's empty. If I say the Lost Embrace, they're going to wonder why it's lost. If I say the Sunderland Sea, what's been sundered? Creating chaos, creating conflicts there gives the reader something to think about and explore and look for details elsewhere in the map. And that's what's interesting. Remember that the function of interest is to keep people wanting to explore more. So you've always got to imply things as well. And on the other hand, visually speaking, adding conflict can be talking more about that symmetry, breaking up the landscape, adding in a lot of different islands, making clusters of points close together, making the mountain peaks a little bit more jagged, adding in some shading, adding in different colors. Conflict visually is as interesting as conflict narratively. Because once you've made a map and you've thought about why it's interesting, then you should approach at the end and make sure that you've added all the story relevant details. If you're going straight from, I want a map and I'm going to add in the relevant details, then you're going to come out with a map that's boring. It's an important part of making a map, don't get me wrong. It's significant, it's crucial, but it's not the only step. If you create a map and you make sure that it looks interesting first, and then you add in and you make sure that every place that you've referenced in the story is on the map, then that's great. They're going to go looking for it. So once you've added some storytelling stuff and you've broken the symmetry and you've added in some conflict, the next part of any map making, any world building, is to add in the details that the player or the reader or the person living in the world, the traveler, will need to know. Because we, when we look at a map, naturally take on the role of the explorer. Wanting to explore more, wanting to take that next step, to follow a thread through the map is what's going to make it interesting and continue to draw your audience in further and further and further. Which is why you need things like those cascading sizes of labels. If you start big and then get smaller and smaller and smaller, guess what the eye is going to do? It's going to follow it down to its smallest possible label. It's just naturally going to do that. If you create a network of roads going from major roads to smaller roads to trail through the mountains, guess what the eye is going to do? It's going to follow them. Adding in the details of things like where the bridges are, where the toll houses are, where the taverns are, how long it takes to get from one place to another, what the distance of the map is, where is impassable and where is an easy place to cross the mountains. Those are the details that will also make it really easy for you to add in detail if you're struggling to create more world building. They'll exist naturally in the world as a great exercise for you to continue to explore your world building. But as details go, you don't really need to stretch your imagination for that kind of thing. They'll exist naturally. You just need to stick them on the map. And the last step is the most vague, but it's something that is worth thinking about as you do the other steps. And that is, when you make your map, make sure that it tells the same kind of story as your story. If you're running a D&D campaign or if you're writing a novel, then you're going to have a genre that you want to explore. It can be, sword and sorcery, fantasy. It could be, grimdark horror. Whatever it is, the map needs to explore and reflect that as well. It's a story in its own right, and you need to be aware when you're creating it that if you want it to be interesting, it's going to have to match the tone of the novel. If it's just, bare basic details, it won't tell a story at all. It won't be interesting to look at for that very reason. So if you're creating a world and you are exploring, a grimdark Call of Cthulhu-esque horror world, then your map needs to have that feeling to it. The mountains need to be tall and jagged. The shading needs to be extremely detailed and a high contrast. You need to work in a single color palette in order to make sure that you feel like all color has been leached from the world. You need to have the references to the language that might turn you mad. You need to have different areas of the map be easy to read and others, shrouded in darkness. And the same thing applies to any genre. If you've got, sword and sorcery, then you need to have a mix of mundane details and mysterious magical details, because that's, the balance that you're going for in that genre. Telling the story in the map means balancing the kinds of information that you will naturally be handing out in the campaign to your players so that they can continue to explore it. It is a resource for them to keep exploring not only the world and the story, but the genre and the expectations that are placed upon them as the reader or the player. So those are the 5 steps in order to turn your map from being boring to being interesting, both narratively and aesthetically. If you're applying yourself to your map in this way, you will come out with a product that is going to allow your players to explore the world and answer some of their own questions, and more importantly, make them ask more questions. Think about how you can draw the eye and the mind further and further and further into the world using your map as a tool to do so. For those who are interested, the map on the left took me about 11 minutes to do. The map on the right took me about 45 minutes to do. So there is a greater time sink in making a more detailed map. So thank you for watching once again one of these tutorials from the Red Quilt. I hope it's been helpful. As always, from the bottom of my heart, with the greatest humility, I wanted to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon and on YouTube as a member. If you are a member, then thank you for watching this. I'm going to be releasing it a little bit early as a treat for all my members. So thank you, so that you can apply some of these ideas to your own worlds. And stick a comment below if you have any specific questions. Ask them in the Discord. The link is in the description below. I am always happy to talk about these kinds of things and give you the tools that you need in order to explore your world. As I mentioned, I have made, for this channel alone, dozens and dozens and dozens of maps that I have slowly begun to iron out even my own misunderstandings and misapprehensions and limitations in maps. So if you want to avail yourself of all of that experience, just drop me a line, ask me a question. I'm happy to chat about that. I'm going to continue to come out with more and more tutorials. So keep your eyes peeled on the channel. Subscribe below, hit this video with a like, and I will see you next time for our next tutorials. Take it easy, and I'll see you soon.